Good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to sign in and make sure everything seems to be okay. It's 10 minutes before the actual schedule starts, so please be patient. We've got a bunch of people that are actually going to be joining the call. If possible, anybody on the call can just let me know that they can hear my voice and also be able to see my screen. If you can just type into the question and answer session, just let me know that you can see my screen and hear my voice. I sent a message out to everyone. I was wondering if someone can respond back and let me know if they can see my screen, as well as also hear my voice. Okay, so we are about 5 minutes in, and then we'll start. Again, I just wanted to see if someone can confirm if they can hear my voice and see my screen. Anyone can just reply back in the chat window or the questions window. All right, just a few more minutes and we will get started. I was wondering if anyone can actually just send me a message. Oh, you can see the screen. Can you hear my voice okay? Thank you, I appreciate that. And we'll get started in about 3 minutes, 4 minutes. All right, we will get going in about 2 more minutes and then we will get started. Thank you again, I appreciate everyone's patience. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to Zephyr for JIRA. What we're going to be doing today is kind of going over the product which is called Zephyr for JIRA. And we are going to be covering a number of different topics. Just some housekeeping notes up front. There is a questions dialog box that you can actually put your questions into, and I see some people have actually already done that. I will address the questions towards the end of the webinar. I'd like to get through the whole webinar first, and then we'll go back and answer some of the questions that you have. If there are some of the more obvious questions, I'll try and answer them right there and then on the spot. But essentially, we're going to go through Zephyr for JIRA, and well, let's see and hope that you enjoy it. Okay, Zephyr for JIRA, what we're going to be covering in terms of topic. The agenda basically is this. We are looking at customers who are currently working with, say, for example, JIRA, and they have JIRA already installed. Maybe they've actually downloaded Zephyr for JIRA and installed it on your system and you've been trying it out. And what we're going to be doing is looking at the different key features of Zephyr for JIRA and what does it bring to you bring to you? What advantages does it bring to you from a test management solution perspective? So we'll be looking at test creations, test scheduling, test executions, looking at the metrics and what sort of metrics you can gain from it, setting up your test cycles, associating all the test cycles to sprints, and sort of going through more of an agile type functionality and understanding exactly how Zephyr for JIRA can actually help you from a QA perspective, as well as from making your life a little bit more efficient from the DevOps perspective as well. Now, the other thing that we're going to be doing is that we have actually got some useful links for you, so you might want to jot these down. So we have the support portal, which you can actually go to. You've got Zephyr TV, which is a series of videos that have been put out there by Zephyr and some by customers as well, in terms of how to do how-to processes. So if somebody wanted to know how to basically create a test case or something like that, you could actually sort of go see and figure out those videos there. We also have a developer zone as well. Lastly, available to you is this email address. Now, a gentleman basically did ask me a question on the questions dialogue, and that's something that we basically want to kind of keep towards the end. But essentially, what we want to be able to do is provide you with as much information as possible. So when we get to the end of the webinar, please sort of email matthew.king@getzephyr.com, and he'll be able to direct you to someone who can actually answer your more detailed questions. Things like around pricing, things about competitive material, that sort of thing, we can actually address offline. This is really kind of focused around Zephyr for JIRA itself and how we can actually manage that from that perspective. Okay, so let's get into the actual product itself. And I'm going to close this out. And this is basically looking at Zephyr for JIRA. I just want one more confirmation from everyone just now, just to make sure that you are still hearing my voice and you can still see the screen. I'd appreciate it. One more little jolt from you, that'd be perfect. The presentation you can actually contact Matthew.King for that presentation that we just saw, but you can also see that information on the support page as well. Okay, so Zephyr for JIRA. When you install JIRA, and if you have JIRA already installed and you install Zephyr for JIRA, one of the things that you're going to see is there can be certain differences that you're going to be able to sort of note straight off the bat. Number one, you're going to find yourself with a test menu, right? So when you look at the test menu, it has all the different functionalities built into Zephyr for JIRA in terms of being able to search for tests, create a new test, plan test cycles, search executions, manage executions, execute actual tests, and do some sort of reporting and traceability information. Now, that's the first thing you're going to see. The other thing that you're going to see is when you actually select a particular project, and in my particular case, Titan is going to be the project that I'm going to use throughout the webinar. When you select on the project itself, one of the things you're going to get on the left-hand side navigation is an additional function called tests. And when you click on tests, what it's going to show you is actually just an overview for that particular project, how many tests you have, how many are unexecuted, how many total executed tests you have, and then any ones that are currently unscheduled. Now, a couple of things you're going to notice is, because we are building into the JIRA framework, the one thing that is very important to know is that we actually keep everything in line with JIRA. So if you have issue types, and if you have workflow schemes, and you have screen schemes, anything that you want to associate with your test management functionality, because when you install Zephyr for JIRA, we do give you some of the basics that come with the system. Now, if you wanted to add more fields to your screens, or you wanted to add a new workflow to it, you are quite open to do that yourself, and we will manage it to that effect. Now, the other thing that we also do is we manage everything using the native fields. So you can see here, for example, on the middle column here, I have components, and I also have labels. And I'm using the components to break down my test cases and requirements based on the actual component that I'm basically linking it to. So I can see that I have 27 against API, I have 14 against calendar. Currently there are 40 that currently do not have any kind of a component associated with it. On the left-hand side, we have the releases. Now, this is how we tie back into the release function, or the JIRA functionality, should we say, is if I go and look at the releases that I schedule for Titan, there are 4 releases there. If I go back into test again, you'll see the 4 releases there, and then you will see the associated count next to the releases. Now, with these releases, we're associating the test cases that need to be run against that. We have the components, and then we have something called labels. Now, one of the things that you want to be able to do is you may have test cases that are associated with the API, but you may also have those test cases which are actually associated with like a smoke test or a regression test. So we use the labels to actually sort of cross-relate all the information about your test case management and be able to sort of correlate the data in a way that's organized and easily attainable. So if I wanted to look and say, how many smoke test cases do I have? Well, currently, by clicking on that, it will tell me that there are 12 test cases that currently is linked to my smoke test environment. And you'll see on the right-hand side that they're coming from various different components. So what I've done is I've created test cases associated to a particular component, and then I've taken it one step further and said, okay, this particular test case is going to be associated with a smoke test, or it could be against another label that you want to basically give it, like, for example, UI behavior, right? It may be a calendar component, but it may be associated with the UI behavior as well. So when you're testing that, you know exactly which test cases you want to basically pull to basically do the testing. Below that, we have some basic charts that show you the execution summary and the creation summary to show you what you're doing over the past 30 days. But in addition to this, you also have reporting. Now, in reports, what we've done is we've added 3 reports at the bottom here as well. So you have a test execution report, a burn-down chart, and a top defects impact testing chart. So each one of these will then give you information associated with that. So going back to the tests themselves, how do we actually go about sort of going, you know, if we're actually creating tests to begin with? Now, there are 3 different ways in which you can actually create a test, right? First is to basically go to the create menu, which you're all familiar with, and you could hit the create button, and you basically get the issue type called test, which is the one that we set up as part of that, and we can actually sort of type in the title here. This is a test, this is test number 1 from the create menu. All right, so then I can associate it with components, so I can give it a component, so I can say it's part of the browser functionality. If I wanted to give it a label, I could do that as well. If I wanted to associate it to a particular release, I could do that too. Now, that's one way of creating a test, and when you create the test, you'll see that the actual test case comes up, and then you have the ability to be able to actually sort of expand that. So I can say step 1, data 1, and you'll forgive me for using these nomenclatures here because I've run out of verbiages to put in here. So just to give you an idea, we can say result 1, and you can add different steps to that particular test case. So I can say step 2 now, data 2, results 2. Now, once you've added this in, a couple of things that you'll notice here is that the capability for you to be able to rearrange the steps is also there. So if I grab this, I can actually say I'll move this up and say I want that step to come before the next one. So you can have the ability to be able to not only create the steps and actually have the information there, but you also have the ability to be able to rearrange them. Now, as we go through the webinar, you'll see the bottom half of the screen will start to populate because you want to have the history for that particular test case. What version is it? What test cycle was associated? What folder is associated with? Are there any defects? Who executed it? When did they execute it? So you want to have all that information there as well. So that's the first way in which we want to create a test. Now, the other thing that you want to be able to do also is to be able to create a test from the test menu. So I can now do create test. Now, you'll notice the difference between the two is that by default, this now comes up with the issue type already selected. You can't change it. So I can say this is test 2 created from the Z4J menu. And again, I can associate the components to it, have same functionality as I did before, and you can go ahead and create that as well. So now I have that test case as well created. Now I can go through and actually populate that test case just like I did before as well, enter the steps, rearrange the steps, and sort of use any of the functionality fields that are currently built in. The third way to do this is basically if you're looking at issues. Say, for example, I go into JIRA, and I now basically say I'm going to use stories as my requirements. So let's go ahead and create a story. So we're going to say we're going to create a story. This is a requirement for the webinar. And again, I can associate components to it. So for example, that, and then just create that story. Now, once I've created the story, this is the concept of, my initial requirements coming in, and I'm basically defining them and creating them as I go along. Now, what I have the ability to be able to do, and this is the third way of doing it, while actually in the requirement itself, I can go in here and create a test. So I can now say, okay, this is the third test. There's the third test created. And again, components, as I did before, you can create those, associate them in. Now, the advantage of doing it here is the fact that when you create the test from within the requirement itself, or the story, it automatically links it to the actual story itself. So you know that that particular test case is actually created in response to that particular requirement. So you have these very, very sort of capable ways and easy ways to be able to get your test cases into the system, as well as getting your requirements into the system, and then linking those requirements together. So now that we have all this in place, right, what do I want to be able to do this? I want to be able to start planning my cycles. I want to be able to understand when am I going to be doing my test, what tests am I going to be doing, who's going to be executing them, and what's actually going to be executed. So what I've done is I've created my test cycles in here. And again, these are sort of pre-created here. But essentially, if I wanted to, say, for example, under release 1.0, I currently have Titan Sprint 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I wanted to, I could create another sprint here as well. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. But if I open up Titan Sprint 1, I have various different folders built into that. And you can see that there is a line chart against it, which basically indicates different colors, and those colors are indicating past failures or work in progress. And this is something you can set up yourself, so a lot of this stuff is also configurable by you. So if I hover over, for example, the API, I can see that there are 7 tests that are currently passed, 5 that are work in progress, and 5 that are blocked. Now, if I wanted to actually get more information about it, I just click on that, and it will show me all the tests within there. So again, you have that sort of very nice sort of navigational facility to be able to look at a particular cycle and then see what's actually within the cycle, and then from within the cycle, the folder itself, look and see what actual test cases were executed, what the status of them are, and if there are any actual defects. And you can see here, for example, Titan 66 here actually has a defect associated with it, right? Now, the other thing is that these are the folder structures within the particular sprint. Now, if I go to the parent level, what the system does is aggregate that information back up to the parent. So from a parent perspective, if I'm looking at the cycle sprint, Titan Sprint 1, I can see that overall across all my folder structures, I have 4 test cases that are currently unexecuted, 22 that are passed, 1 that's failed, 11 that's work in progress, and 5 that are currently blocked. So it's a nice way of being able to sort of understand overall what's the sort of status of my particular cycle that I'm currently working with. Now, in creating these cycles, it's very easy to do that. You can actually sort of go into the system here and say, create a cycle. Now, I can create a cycle. I'm going to call this Titan Sprint 5, just so we can see that. And I can also specify a build and an environment and a start date and end date. So I'm going to basically start the date today. End date is going to be the 18th, let's say, for example, and save that. And Titan Sprint 5 will then get created inside of this environment. And yes, okay, well, I made a, let me just go ahead and create this one. And there's my Titan Sprint 5. So release 1, then you have Titan Sprint 1, which is the ones we were looking at before, and then you have Titan Sprint 5. Now, once you get Titan Sprint 5 in, how do I get test cases associated with it? So I can go in here and say, click on this and say, add test. Now, again, multiple ways in which you can actually add the test in here. So I can actually go ahead and just do it by the actual test case itself. So I can say, hey, look, there's a test case I created. I want to associate it to that particular Titan Sprint 5, and I can do that. And as soon as I do that, it's now associated with it, and its status is unexecuted. And I can continue to do this like this and just add more and more test cases to it, right? But this is more manual. This is more sort of like a slower way of being able to kind of bring things in. The other thing you can also do is you can also do add tests by filter. So I can actually have a filter that says, you know, test cases that have failed, for example, right? So we go back and look and see my test cases. So I do a search for issues. I can look at all my, for example, sprints in here. These are all the filters that are currently set up in here. So, for example, I can look at calendar tests. These are 14 tests that are in there. So if I go back to my planning cycle, and I go back to Titan Sprint 5, I now add test, and this time I'm going to basically do it from the filter itself, and I say calendar tests. As soon as I do that and add that, those tests are automatically added to that particular environment. Now here, I can also do, for example, adding a folder. So I can actually sort of say this is the API folder. And then for the API folder, I can then drag and drop and move things to particular folders if I wish to. So this is a nice way of being able to do this. Now, the other thing that we have capability-wise is for you to be able to clone an environment as well. So let's look at Titan Sprint 2, much shorter environment. And if I wanted to basically repeat that, I can select this and say clone this. And this time I'm going to basically call it Titan Sprint 6. And again, I'm going to change the dates for the start and date to be more specific, so I can say let's start it on the 22nd and end it on the 24th, and save that. It will now clone that environment for you. Now you have, not only do you have Titan Sprint 1, but you also have Titan Sprint 6, and Titan Sprint 6 is now a cloned environment. So you have this very sort of nice and easy way of being able to sort of take your tests and environments and cycles and clean them up and create them as in cycles. Now, if I go back into my webinar environment, so for example here, I have a number of different unexecuted tests. If I were to go and execute one of these tests, I can execute them. And now I have the ability to be able to manually sort of set the status of this particular test and say, this is currently a pass status, for example, and move that on. Now, immediately, as soon as you start doing this, you'll start to see the history is actually beginning to build up. So as we go through this, you'll start to see that when I show you some of the other ones in the system, you'll see that there are a number of different sort of tests that we created. So let's go back to Titan Sprint 5, for example, the one we had before. And we have the ones that we created today, so Webinar 1. If I now execute this, you'll remember that this one has steps in it. So if I now execute the particular test case here and say I want to execute this and fail that, the moment I basically set that up, it'll ask me if I want to fail the actual parent status as well, which I can do. Now, I have options here. I can either create the defect at the step level or I can create the defect at the parent level. So I have both options available. I can create an issue. In my particular case, I'm using a bug. So I'm going to say this is a defect created. And my typing has gotten bad. So is a defect created. And of course, you know, I can basically sort of put detailed descriptions and everything else associated with it. And now that particular defect associated with that particular step of that particular test case. So you have that capability within the system as well. Now, you can also go into the system and actually sort of look at all the executions. So I can say search for test executions. Now, you'll notice that I have set up certain filters on the left-hand side, which is something that you can do. So I want to look at all the ones that currently failed. Now, I can see that Titan Sprint 5 has one that's failed, Titan Sprint 1, Titan Sprint 2, they have ones that have failed. Now, if I decide to, I can now actually go here and select the Tools menu and say Move to a Cycle. Under the Project Titan, I'm going to select the version Release 1, and I'm also going to go to Sprint 4 Retest, and I'm going to basically put it in the retest folder and save that. Now, what that has done is basically cleared up my backlog because I now no longer have any failed tests because they've all been taken out. They are now either unexecuted or they are, you know, whatever other status you have. Now, if I go back into my planning cycle, I can now see that in Titan Sprint 4, under retest, those are the tests that I just associated with it. So immediately you have that sort of very nice, easy way of being able to take your tests and move them around and associate them with the actual sort of environments that you need to be able to do. Now, if we go back into, like, say, for example, this one here, Titan 118. If I open that up, there's several different executions that have happened. So this is basically what I was going to show you. They're all by release 1, but it's associated with Titan Sprint 6, which is currently unexecuted. Titan Sprint 4 retest has unexecuted, but in Titan Sprint 2, it passed. So you have multiple ways in which to basically look at the history for this. Okay, so going back to my planning of test cycles, the other important thing is, apart from getting all this information into the system and being able to execute this, you also have the ability to be able to sort of manage your executions as well. So if I go in here, I can say, you know, the ones that are currently unexecuted, show me those. I can select all of those, and I can do a bulk update and say, I want to change the status of all of these to work in progress, and if I decide, I can also basically set the status of each of the steps to be work in progress as well. And once I do that and save that, it will allow me to do a mass update on the system, and basically you'll see the number of tail tests that are basically moved from unexecuted to work in progress. So these are all the ones that currently just brought into work in progress. And today's date is the 15th of May, as you can see here, and you can see the date change of when it actually happened. Okay, so now going back into the planning cycle for a second, one of the other things that you want to be able to do is make sure that you have some traceability information. Traceability information is very key. So basically, when you look at release 1 and I look at the requirements that I want to be able to look at, I want to know if all my requirements have association to test cases, and if there are any executions that have taken place, what are the actual sort of outcome of those executions. So if I select that and query this, select the whole group and say generate report, you will see here, for example, Titan 236. It's in the current status of to do. It's a requirement linked to a particular test. Open that test up, and there's currently no executions on it, but let's go down further. Look at Titan 17, open this up. You'll see that Titan 17, as a requirement, is linked to Titan 66. That particular test was executed, is actually work in progress in Titan Sprint 6. It's in the email folder of Titan Sprint 2 as a pass, and it's in the API Titan Sprint 1 as a work in progress. And there actually is a defect associated with it as well. So this all gives you very nice information about how you can do traceability within the system. Okay, now all this being said, this all has to tie into your DevOps type environment as well. So if I go and, let's say, for example, look at my Titan board, which is my sprint board, I have the ability to be able to look at it from a test view perspective. So I want to do a test view by sprint. Now all my sprints are defined in here, right? Now you'll see Titan Sprint 3 here has only one particular cycle associated with it. So I can say I want to add a cycle to this. So when I do that, I can say release 1, and I can scroll down and say pick Titan Sprint 5, and I want to basically pull the API folder, and I can hit save. Now what I've done is I've associated that particular test cycle to the actual sprint in JIRA. Now going back to my view again, what I also have is the ability for me to be able to look at Titan Sprint, say for example 3. I can see that there are tests associated with it. Now if I look at any of the ones above this, I can see that when I open this up, you can see the requirement, the test case, the status, and what cycle it was in, who it was executed by, when it was executed. So you have very detailed information. So when you're actually looking at this one here, Titan 19, which has been approved, there are a number of different tests that were associated with it. Some were actually work in progress, some were passed, some were unexecuted, but you have all the information, including the defects associated with each execution associated with that too. So you have a very, very detailed view in terms of, you know, when you're actually working with dev and working with QA to streamline your processes and be able to sort of come to very quick decisions on some of these things. So I'm going to go back to my boards again and just look at the sprint board itself. And again, similar sort of functionality there. If I go back and open it up, I can actually open up all the different tests and see all the issues and see what's actually been associated with each one of those as normal, as you would normally do. Okay, so going back to my test, planning on my test cycles, right? So now what you have is, do you have the ability to be able to, you've seen the ability to be able to create tests. So I've been able to create a test from the main menu. I can create a test from the actual Zephyr for JIRA menu. I can create a test directly from the actual requirement or the story within the system. All the information around the workflows and the schemas and everything else is configurable by you. You can set up all the test cycles that you wish, and as soon as you create the test cycles, you can also basically look at all the folder structures you want. Now, one other thing that you've also seen is the execution, the bulk execution capabilities, as well as being able to execute manually each one of the tests as you go through. Now, in sprint number 6, for example, I may want to add another folder in here. So if I add another folder and say this is basically going to be the regression test, right? What I can now do is in regression test, and this is the third way of adding all the tests into the system. So let me just cancel this for a minute. You'll see that I have a number of different tests in here. So let's say, for example, webinar. If I were to fail this test here, for example, and let's say, for example, we'll fail that test and we'll fail the next one associated with it, and then fail this one as well. So now I have 3 failed test cases in here, and let's go into Chrome and let's also basically mark a couple of these as failed as well. There's a purpose behind doing this, and I'll be very clear in a second. So now what I've done is in sprint 1, I have a series of tests that were failed, but in the last sprint before this release gets done, I want to basically retest those. So I can say go back and add tests, but now from a previous cycle, so I can say go to release 1, type in sprint 1, right, and let's pick the Chrome folder, webinar folder, and I say add those, so go down and look at everything that was basically of execution status failed, and bring that in. And you'll see that immediately those particular ones that were failed in the first one, this one here, which is 149, 150, and 152, which are failed in this particular cycle, are now been put into here as unexecuted, so I can repeat the tests on here. And this time, I may actually pass this particular test. And if I save that and go into the history, you'll see the history of this particular test as being fully encompassing, telling you that, hey, it failed in sprint 1, but it passed in sprint 6. So if you take this concept a little bit further and you have multiple releases going on, you have the ability to be able to look at a particular test case that is affecting multiple releases and say, well, it passed here, it failed there, it's, you know, for whatever reason. So now you can actually sort of get some more decision making around that. So now that we have seen the fact that you can actually create tests, you can actually sort of manage your test cycles, you can add tests to your test cycles, you can execute the tests, you can do reporting across this, but you also have the dashboarding capability as well. You need to be able to sort of, you know, come back to a dashboarding type function where you can actually set up JIRA and you can set up a dashboard for this. Now, in the dashboarding capability here, what you'll have is the ability for you to be able to look at all the different sort of components, and this is basic JIRA abilities. Now, if you add Gadget to this, that you'll see that when you actually install Zephyr for JIRA, you'll see that there are a number of gadgets that we provide to you, and each one of these is configurable just like a JIRA gadget would be. So I can actually do a test execution report, add that to the system. I can look at the project that I want to basically do. I can look at the release that I'm currently working with. I can look at it from a cycle perspective, include up to 5 cycles in here, and save that, and that gives me the report that I'm looking for. That's the same thing here as well. But you can change this and say, for example, well, Titan's one of the projects I'm working on, but I also want to look at Europa as well. And currently for Europa, we don't have anything there. So see release 1 cycles, that may have some information though. But you have the ability to be able to sort of go across and actually sort of report across multiple projects and get multiple different sort of reports based on that, right down to the execution progress, distribution, like in terms of all the cycles you have, how many are unexecuted, how many passed, failed, work in progress. And if I wanted to look at any one of these, I could just hyperlink, click on them, and it will take me directly to all the tests that were actually failed in that particular one. So it's a very nice, easy to use working environment. Okay, so let me have a look at some of the questions that are coming up. Okay, so let me just go through these a little bit. So Anne, again, I would like to, she would like, the question basically from Anne is, I'd like an overview of the pricing model structure for a small company. Basically, with Zephyr for JIRA, it's on the marketplace in the Atlassian marketplace. And if you have a JIRA for X number of users, you do have to match the number of user count for Zephyr for JIRA to the actual user count for JIRA. And you can do that directly from the Atlassian market space. Also, what sets you apart from the competition? Q-test, PractiTest, etc. Well, you know, that's kind of an interesting question, and this kind of puts you into one of those situations where you want to try and make things better for yourself. I will answer that question this way, Anne. It's about your process. It's about what you do as an organization. A tool is a tool is a tool. A tool has a slightly better interface to another tool. Some other tool may have slightly better functionality, or they have the same functionality that they do it slightly differently. It's all about your process. How well have you organized your environment? How well have you organized your processes? Because all we will do is map and follow what you defined as guidelines to how you want to manage your requirements, your test cases, your test cycles. This is a tool that does all the feature functionality that you're looking for, and that is available from within Q-test, PractiTest, and other products in the JIRA marketplace as well. It's been in the marketplace for a long time, and I think one of the clues you're going to basically look at is when you look at the marketplace add-on for Zephyr for JIRA, look at the number of downloads, compare that to everyone else, and you'll get a reasonable answer at that point. Is the presentation available somewhere? Arthur, that was a question by you. Again, email matthew.king@getzephyr.com, and he will be able to sort of provide you with information. Can we copy and reuse existing test cases from release to release? And yes, you can. You have the ability to be able to sort of clone the test cases and use them over again. Or if they're the same test case, but you're going from one release to another, use that test case in the new releases. And now you also have a history in the execution history, as I showed you, that this particular test case was used in release 1 in this particular cycle, in this particular folder, and its status was this. And then it can show you that it was actually used in another project with another folder and another cycle, and that information is also there as well. How would you recommend retiring test cases? The easiest way to do retiring of test cases is really to do a workflow. So if you have a workflow, of course, you don't want to delete the test cases once they've actually been linked to anything. And because it's now you're basically sort of jeopardizing your auditability within the system. And anyone who basically wants to come back and look at your system and say, well, you know, you did a release a year ago, I want to look at all the test cases. But those test cases are probably not relevant to what you're looking at right now. So I would use the workflow. Put the status into a archive status, call it whatever you want to do, and any filtering you do on that says everything, show me everything except for in the archive status. That would be the best recommended approach to where you can handle that. Do you support shared DLL steps, etc.? Yes, we do. Krishna asked the question, how can we take benefit of Zephyr if we want to perform automated testing tools like HP ALM tool? Okay, so that, Krishna, this is a bigger question than I can answer right now. I would like to be able to take this offline and answer that question to you. And if you can email matthew.king@getzephyr.com, I would appreciate it. But let me say this. ALM, HP's ALM tool, and Zephyr for JIRA, as well as any other tool that you're going to find in the JIRA marketplace, they are two different animals altogether. ALM is a much heavier footprint and has a lot more features built into it, and it comes from a waterfall model. So that's why a lot of people are moving off of ALM into Zephyr for JIRA or Zephyr Enterprise, which is not the JIRA version, but it's a separate version of Zephyr Test Management, which has built-in automation and everything else. So again, it's a deeper question, and I'd like to be able to sit down and talk to you a bit more about that. If you can reach out to matthew.king@getzephyr.com, ask him that you talk to me. My name is Sohail, S-O-H-A-I-L, and we can actually sort of arrange a call and sort of get into a deeper discussion on that. Sonar asked the question, can we run multiple test cases, can we run a case multiple times within the same test cycle? Yes, you can. And you'll have the history in there as well. So each of the test cases that we basically executed, every time I executed it, it still starts the history. So if I were to go back into the system here and actually do a search for test cases, you'll see that, for example, in the one that we had, let's go back and see one that we've done some work on. You'll see that the history on this particular test case on the execution side. So if I go back and sort of look at that and say, let's go back to search test cycles. Let's say webinar. Now this is a good one because we had this particular thing execute two times. We changed the status on it. If I go and look at the execution history for it, show more, I can see the information that was actually sort of done there. So who did it, when they changed the status, what status it was, and that information is there as well. Bruce Lewis, can you add actual screenshots to test cases? Yes. This is basically sort of capabilities within JIRA. So you have the ability to be able to take a screenshot and then cut and paste it into it, or you can use the exploratory tool called Capture, and you can actually sort of screen capture and put that directly into the actual test case itself. That does kind of come back to a question that somebody else had, which I'm missing right now, but there it is, but we will come to that. Actually, it's the next question. I would like to know about automation Eclipse Selenium from Chris Singleton. So what we do with automations, the distinguishing factor between Zephyr for JIRA and, say, for example, Zephyr Enterprise, which is the higher end product is, I'm going to basically bring this up here, just to answer your question. If you go into the Atlassian market space and type in Zephyr, you have a capability here called Zappy, which is Zephyr API. Now this will allow, it's got a fully functional REST API, you also have the ZQL language, but it also integrates automatically with CI tools, like for example Jenkins and other tools like that. Now, to answer your question more specifically around this, is that with this tool you can integrate with any of the automation tools as well. So you can actually link into Selenium, you can link into Cucumber, you can link into various different sort of tools like that. Now the thing about this is that it is available on the server version and it is available on the cloud as well. So you can actually use this on both environments as well. So it integrates with Jenkins, it integrates with Bamboo, and of course you can use this to integrate with your Selenium and your Cucumber and Tricentis and various other different automation tools. That was a question by Chris. Krishna, can you please explain what is the difference between test session and test cycle? So the test cycle itself is really the environment that you're actually setting up that you want to run the environment in. So if I go back into here and say I want to manage my test cycles, I'm planning out. I'm saying, here's release 1, and in release 1, I'm going to have a number of different cycles. In release 2, I'll have a number of different cycles from a testing perspective. This basically breaks it down. You can equate them to your sprints, essentially, but if you choose to differentiate them from the sprints, you can do that too. Nadine asked the question, can we customize issue type and statuses? Yes, you can. So as I said before, we're based around and work around the JIRA framework. So if you go into the system and decide you want to change the field scheme for the defects and or for the actual sort of test cases themselves, you can add your own fields. It's basically JIRA, except that we've actually pre-configured it for various functions within here as well. Is there a way to delete a test? Yes, you can, as long as a test does not touch anything. If it's a test that was created and it hasn't been executed, it hasn't been linked to anything, yes, you can. But the moment you make that test link to another object or use it in an execution or associate it with a test cycle, you have now linked that particular object to another object. Therefore, you shouldn't be able to delete it. That's just best practices. If you want to then not use that for whatever reason, my suggestion would be use the workflow ingenuitively and create a status as rejected, and therefore move that test to a status of rejected. Therefore, you keep the audit trail and you keep the auditability. Anne said, sorry, asked question before we went through the demo. Okay. Chris, does Zappy allow seamless integration? Yes, it does. Essentially, what you'll be able to do is you'll have in the test cycles themselves, you'll have an automation folder, and you can actually have the system basically go off and do those for you. Thana, can you talk about the importer utility? So yes, there is importer utility available within here. You can actually bring in your test cases and or your JIRA issues into the system. Now, in certain cases, we have migration tools from other people that we can actually import their test cases in. We can bring them in an Excel form, a CSV form. Sonal asked the question, is there a way to link multiple tests to a single JIRA, with a single JIRA in one single step? So you want to basically link multiple tests to, yes, you can do that. So when you go back into, say, for example, an issue type, and you're searching for issues, let's say, for example, I want to pick a story here, I'm using this. When I do the linkage here, I can link as many as I want. So I can actually relate to, and I can pick this test, and I can also pick that test, and I can also pick that particular test, and say, there you go. Now I've linked that particular requirement to multiple different tests within the system. And Bruce says, thank you, and I appreciate that, Bruce. Okay, so we're actually at the marker here. So, again, like I said, let me just repeat the name. Matthew, let me bring up the presentation one more time so you can actually see it. That would be easier. And the email address you're looking for is matthew.king@zephyr.com. Email this person here, and they will be able to definitely get in touch with you, with me, or with somebody who can actually help you answer any of your questions. And I think, Krishna, you definitely should basically get in touch with Matthew so we can discuss what your requirements are with respect from an ALM perspective as well. Okay, I appreciate everyone's time. I hope that this was useful. I do hope that you gained some knowledge from here. Oh, actually, so Sonal just had a comment, passing comment here, said, we've used Zappy with Test Complete Python. It works really well. Thanks for the demo. Okay, I appreciate it. And I appreciate your comments too. Thank you very much. And have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.